Imagine if you could talk to data, and it actually listened. With just a few words, you could ask, what happened, why it happened, and what comes next. That's what SQL does. It turns plain data into answers. Because SQL is not just code, it's how the world understands information.
Hey everyone, this is Aman and I've been working with all sorts of databases and database tools for over a decade. I know a lot of you guys are looking to learn SQL, but the challenging part is how do you get started, and more importantly, what are the different concepts that you need to learn based on your requirement? Because there are so many different concepts in SQL. Do you need to learn each and everything? Different jobs would need a different level of SQL expertise. Some of you might just want to learn basic SQL. Some of you guys might be looking to learn an intermediate level of SQL, and there might be few of you who already know the basics and intermediate and they want to learn advanced SQL. And then there are others who are looking to be an SQL developer or a database developer. In that case, just normal SQL would not suffice. You might want to learn certain additional SQL concepts. And that is why I wanted to make this video a complete SQL roadmap where I'm going to mention all different SQL concepts that you will need to learn based on the level of expertise that you want to gain in SQL, based on the job or whatever you are looking for. I have divided this video into 5 parts. In the first part, I am going to talk about all the prerequisites, how do you choose a database, what tools do you need, etc. The next 4 parts, I'm going to split them based on the level of expertise. There is a basic level, an intermediate level, an advanced level, and also SQL for developers. Under each of these sections, I'm going to mention exactly what SQL concepts you will need to learn. I'm also going to mention all the resources that you can use to practice these concepts. Apart from that, I will also show you the platforms that you can use to practice the same. And of course, I'm also going to mention the jobs that you can target under each of these sections. Let's start with the first one, which is the prerequisites. The very first thing that you need to understand is SQL is basically a programming language that is used to interact with a relational database. Let's say you are building an application or a software. Your application will definitely need data, but the data is generally not stored in the application itself. In most cases, the data is stored in a relational database. Of course, there are non-relational databases as well, which may not use SQL, but I am only talking about relational databases right now. And currently, the most widely used database is still a relational database. If you have an application and it has some data, the data is stored in a relational database. So there needs to be a way that your application is able to interact with the relational database. A relational database understands one language, and that one language is SQL. If your application needs to communicate with the relational database, then it has to communicate in the language of SQL, and that is why you need SQL. The problem is there are different types of relational databases. The most popular relational databases are Oracle MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, and PostgreSQL. Then there are cloud-based databases or data warehouses such as Google BigQuery, Amazon Redshift, Snowflake, etc. Among all of these databases, which database should you choose when you are getting started in learning SQL? The simple answer is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which database you choose in order to learn SQL, because 80 to 90% of the SQL that is used in all of these RDBMS are exactly the same. The syntax is the same, the concepts are all the same, and whatever concept you will be able to apply in one RDBMS, you will also be able to apply in any other RDBMS that you might have to use in the future. Let's say you learned SQL in Oracle and tomorrow you get a job in a company where they are using Microsoft SQL Server. You do not have to worry at all. Within a span of a few days, you will get the hang of Microsoft SQL Server, and whatever you have learned in Oracle will still be applicable in Microsoft SQL SQL Server. Of course, there might be 10 to 20% of differences. Mainly the changes might be in certain functions which might be supported in one RDBMS and might not be supported in another RDBMS, but you would generally have an alternate function which basically does the same thing in this other RDBMS as well. You just need to Google it and find those functions. In some cases, there might be some syntactical differences in certain concepts which would be very minor. When it comes to choosing the RDBMS, it does not matter. But of course, if you know that there is a specific RDBMS that is used in your job, or you know that you will be building your project in a particular RDBMS, then it's always better to choose that particular RDBMS. But let's say you do not have a preference. In that case, if you ask me, my personal preference would be to go with PostgreSQL. It's free, it's lightweight, and I think it's one of the best databases that you can use, especially if you want to start learning SQL. Let's say that I have selected your database. The first thing that you need to do is install your database in your system. If you're using a cloud-based database, then all you need to do is just do a browser setup, like an online setup of that cloud-based database or data warehouse. Once you have installed any of these databases, the next thing that you need is an IDE with which you will be able to connect to the database and do all sorts of different operations. Now, the four most popular RDBMS I mentioned, each of this RDBMS comes with its own IDE. For example, if you're using Oracle, then it will come with SQL Developer. If you are using Microsoft SQL Server, then it comes with SQL Server Management Studio in Windows, and if you're using Mac, then it comes with Azure Data Studio. When it comes to MySQL, you have a tool called MySQL Workbench, which you can install in order to work with MySQL. And when it comes to PostgreSQL, we have a tool called pgadmin, which you can use to connect to Postgres and start working. This is a prerequisite, that is, have a database installed and also have an IDE installed. If you are using a cloud-based database or data warehouse, then make sure to have it set up in your browser. Now let's look at how you can learn basic SQL. First, I'm going to cover all of these concepts that you will need to learn. Then we will see what free learning resources and which platforms can be used for practice. Finally, I'll talk about the jobs that you can target with basic SQL skills. The concepts that you will need first of all are: what is a relational database, how is data stored in a relational database, what is schema with respect to a relational database. Once you have this basic understanding, then you can look into different SQL commands. Basically, there are 5 different categories of SQL commands. They are DDL, DML, DCL, TCL and DQL. Under each of these categories, there are different SQL commands. Each of these commands are meant to do certain specific tasks. So you need to understand what each of these commands will do. It is also important to understand the difference between certain commands like drop, delete, truncate, etc. because some of you guys might get confused that they look similar, but there is a difference and it's better to understand all of these commands clearly. Once you are through with SQL commands, then it's time to understand what are data types. When it comes to data types, there are hundreds of different data types, but you don't need to learn each and every data type. Primarily, I would say there are 5 types of data, which include string data types, maybe varchar, text, etc. Then we have integer data types, maybe int, number or something else. Then we have a date data type. Then we have float or decimal data type. And finally, we have Boolean data type. Now, Boolean is not supported in every data type, so you might have to check that out particularly. And additionally, I would also ask that you understand what an identity column is. Basically, if you want to auto increment a column, you can define the column as an identity column. It's good to understand how you can define a column as an identity column and how you can basically load the data into that or modify the data into a table which contains an identity column. Once you have these basic understandings, we will then look at a very important concept called constraints. In constraints, there are several different types of constraints, but primarily you need to understand what is a primary constraint and what is a foreign key constraint. Without understanding this, you should probably not proceed to learn anything else. In addition to this, there are other constraints such as check constraints, not null constraints, unique constraints, and default constraints. It's good to understand these. There will be other constraints as well, but I would recommend that you first understand all of this and not worry about each and every constraint that is available. Once you are through with constraints, then you can understand normalization in SQL. There are different normal forms, the first normal form, the second normal form, etc. And it's good to understand why you might need to make your database normalized, like how does it help and what are the different rules present in each of these normal forms. After that, you can look at operators. There are several different types of operators. You don't need to learn each and every operator, but the most common operators are something that you would basically use in each and every SQL query that you write. Arithmetic operators, logical operators, comparison operators, union, all are some of the most common operators that are used all over SQL. Just focus on these operators to start with. And then of course you need to know what is a case statement. Not just a simple case statement, but a nested case statement, which is a case statement which is present inside of another case statement. Just try to understand that. It's very simple. And once you're through with that, then there are certain important SQL clauses like distinct clause, order by clause, limit, or top clause. Limit is basically used in most of the RDBMS, but in Microsoft SQL Server, you need to use top instead of limit. Basically, just try to understand what each of these clauses are meant to do, and I think that should be pretty good. And then finally, inner join. Basically, if you want to fetch data from multiple tables, how do you do that using an inner join? These are all the different concepts that you will need to learn in order to say that you have basic knowledge of SQL. SQL is used in a relational database, but there are non-relational databases as well. It's always good to understand what a database is, what data is, how is data stored, and all of these basic things are going to be very useful to you in the future to understand these concepts. A resource that I would highly recommend is W3 Schools. I'm sure that most of you guys have already heard of it, but it is a fantastic resource and a very good platform where you can basically find syntax to all of the different categories of commands that I've just mentioned. Once you have learned all of these basic concepts, the next thing you will need to do is practice writing SQL queries where you will be using all of these basic concepts. In order to practice, I would recommend these three platforms: Strata Scratch, LeetCode, and Lemur. In each of these platforms, you will easily find easy, medium, and hard problems. Since you're only looking at basic concepts, I would ask that you only solve problems which are labeled easy. Go to Strata Scratch and just search for easy problems on SQL and you should easily find them. In the same way, you will find easy questions on LeetCode and pretty much the same thing in Lemur as well. These are the top 3 platforms where you can solve SQL queries. Choose the easy ones and probably you will be able to solve most of these problems if you're comfortable with the basic concepts. Now let's see what are the jobs that you can target with basic SQL knowledge. I would say that if you're looking for a business analyst role or a junior analyst role, the basic SQL should be more than enough. And then there are also software engineers, maybe not the senior software engineers, but a normal software engineer. Someone with up to 3 years of experience would probably use SQL to write insert queries or update queries or anything like that in order to connect to the database and update the information on their database. Basic knowledge of SQL should be enough for any of these jobs. Now, this is basically how you learn the basic SQL commands, all of the different resources, all of the different platforms, and all of the jobs that you can apply. Now let's go back and look at what you need to do if you want to learn intermediate level of SQL. Maybe in this case, first let's talk about jobs. Who should be learning intermediate SQL? If you're looking for a role in data analyst or data scientist, then I think just basic SQL will not be enough. You would have to learn the intermediate level of SQL as well. When it comes to an intermediate level of SQL, you need to learn group by and having. I know that many of you would argue that group by and having clause should have been a part of basic SQL, but the thing is, there are several complex queries that you can write using group by and having clause, and which is why I did not want to put that as part of basic. You also need to know how to use aggregate functions: min, max, average, sum, and count. And then you will also need to know the order of execution. By knowing the order of execution, it will be very helpful for you when you're trying to understand an already written query, or sometimes when you're stuck, the order of execution query is something that can help you to get unstuck. You will definitely need to know subqueries. It's a very important concept. You will also need to know what a CTE is or how to use the with clause. You of course need to know the different types of joins, the outer joins, left join, right join, full outer join, as well as cross join. You will also need to know how a self join works. A self join is very important and you should be comfortable with that. Finally, you also need to learn certain inbuilt functions. Mainly you can learn string functions as well as date functions, where you will need to extract month from a date, or you will need to reformat a date, or you need to fetch a substring from a string, or replace a null value with some other value. These are different types of inbuilt function that are present in every RDBMS. So based on whatever RDBMS you are learning, you will need to get hands-on or remember very important inbuilt functions. Now, I'm going to provide you a resource where you will find a list of all of these inbuilt functions in a short while. And then finally, a very important concept is a window function. You should definitely learn what a window function is and how to use it. Without knowing window function, I do not think that you can survive as a data analyst or a data scientist. There are a lot of window functions, but the most important ones would be rank, dense rank, row number, lead, and obviously lag. Apart from that, there are also window functions such as first value, last value, nth value, entile, and others as well. Finally, you would also need to understand what are views and why are they used. These are all different concepts that you will need to learn in order to get to an intermediate level in SQL. And after that, one additional resource that I would recommend is the SQL case study from Data with Danny. It is a fantastic platform. Here, if you go, you would basically find 8 case studies. And if you open just the first one, you would see that a case study is basically something where you have a scenario, you need to understand it, and then you have sample tables and sample data given, and then based on that scenario and the data, there will be certain problems that you need to solve by writing SQL queries. These case studies are very useful and you will get an end-to-end picture of how you should go about understanding a problem and then solving a problem. I think these are the platforms that I would recommend for an intermediate level of SQL. Now let's look at what you should be doing if you already have a basic and intermediate level of SQL knowledge and now you want to get to an advanced level of SQL knowledge. In this case, the jobs that you can target by learning advanced SQL is basically like a data engineer or an ETL developer. And the concepts that you would additionally need to learn are recursive SQL queries, pivot table, or crosstab. Pivot is something that I don't think is supported in MySQL, but it is supported in Microsoft SQL Server and in Oracle. Crosstab is supported in PostgreSQL. You also need to learn materialized views. You also need to learn stored procedures, and of course you need to learn user-defined functions. These are the concepts that you will additionally need to learn in order to get to an advanced level of SQL. As part of the intermediate level of SQL, you did not have to solve all of the 8 case studies of Data with Danny. Maybe a couple of them would be sufficient, but when it comes to a hard level or an advanced level of SQL, I think it's better that you solve all the 8 case studies. Now let's look at the last section, which is how much SQL should you learn if you're targeting to become a database developer or an SQL developer. The concepts that you will additionally need to learn are indexes. You need to know why indexes are useful, how does it improve the performance of your query. You also need to know how to use the right index for your query. You should not be creating index for every column, but you should know what is the right index that you should create based on the query that you are frequently writing. You should then learn about triggers. You should learn about temporary tables. You should also know about how to dynamically execute an SQL statement. And then you should also know about PL SQL concepts, because as a database developer or an SQL developer, you would not only be writing SQL queries, but you would also be writing certain procedural languages, maybe packages, procedures, user-defined functions, and many other stuff like that. And as part of that, you should be knowing what are variables, what are cursors, what are collection types or arrays, loop statements, if-else statements, exception handling, and packages. And after all of this, one very important thing that you will need to learn is performance tuning. When it comes to performance tuning, you will mainly need to know what is an explain plan, how to basically read an explain plan. You will need to understand that, and you will also need to understand how table statistics basically help in improving the performance. You need to know about table partitions, and then finally we have these three other concepts in DBMS: profiler, SQL trace, and TKPROF or TKPROF. These are the concepts specific to Oracle, but these are mainly used if you want to track the performance of your queries or your procedures. I'm sure there are alternate ways to do this in other RDBMS as well, but it's always good to know these concepts. This is a complete roadmap on whatever you want to learn SQL for, whether it's a junior data analyst role, a junior data scientist role, a software engineer, a data engineer, an SQL developer, or anything else. I hope that this video was useful to you and that you came to know about all the different concepts that are available in SQL. Apart from that, I also highly recommend that you check out our videos on Python roadmap and Power BI roadmap as well. They are going to be immensely helpful in your journey to become a data analyst or a data scientist as well. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a thumbs up, leave your feedback in the comments, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back again in the next one.